Salut! Today's video is all about ER verbs. Now this is a totally new concept for you. So far up until this point, the only verb that we've had is the verb avoir, which means to have. And you learned how there are 6 different forms of avoir that can coordinate and match up with the 6 different types of subject pronouns that we have. So there's an I form of avoir and a you form and so on and so forth. A je form and a tu form, right? Avoir happens to be an irregular verb. Means that there's no pattern to it, there's no other verbs like it. The forms that you learned with the AI and the AS and the avans and all of that only go for the verb for to have. What I'm about to tell you about today is a category of verbs. So once you learn the rules that I teach you today, this will apply not just to one verb like the avoir forms did, but to any verb that is an ER verb. So let's get started. What is an ER verb? It's a verb, which by the way is an action word, things like to run, to study, to listen, things like that. And the way it's different than other verbs such as avoir is it ends in the letters ER. And I'll give you some examples of that from our notes here in just a second, but right off the top of your head, écouter, the verb for to listen, parler, the verb for to talk, manger, the verb for to eat. If you look back at your notes, they're all verbs that end in the letters ER. In a moment, we'll talk about how you have to change the endings on ER verbs, and the reason why you have to change them is because verbs always match or agree with their subject. And we talked about this with avoir. We talked about how in English you'll say things like I have, but he has. French, then you had j'ai, ai for the je or the I form, and a for the il form for he has. With ER verbs, it's the same thing. You have to change the ending so that the subjects match up and you're making sense. So if you take, for example, that verb I mentioned earlier of écouter, which is the verb for to listen, you say I listen, but he listens. In English, we add an S to the he form. In French, there are several different forms, and you just have to memorize them so that you're making sense when you're matching them up with these subject pronouns. So just as a quick review, it's always good to know, since they are matching their subject pronouns, what the subject pronouns are. Don't forget that je is I, tu is you, il is he, elle is she, nous is we, vous is either you for one person who's an adult that's not related, that you formal, or it can also mean y'all if you're talking to a group of people, and ils and elles are both they. So now that we've reviewed all of that, let's talk about how you actually change an ER verb. And I know this still seems kind of vague at the moment, but jot this down, and when we get to the examples, you'll start to understand how this works. So whenever you see an ER verb and you want to use it with one of those subjects that we listed above, let's say you want to say something like we listen to music. If you want to do the nous or the we form of écouter, there's 2 things that you have to do to écouter. So this isn't about just memorizing forms like with avoir, it's about memorizing a process. The first thing you do is you drop off the ER of écouter. That'll leave you with just the letters E-C-O-U-T, écoute. And then you have to add special endings. When you add these endings, it makes it agree. It's like I said before, it's like how in English we add an S for he listens. In French, these are the endings that you have to add. So if you're trying to do the je form of a verb, you add the letter E. If you try to do the tu form of the verb, you're adding an ES. If you try to do the he or she or the il or elle form, you add just the letter E. If you're going back to that example I just gave, if we wanted to say we listen, you would take that écoute thing that we talked about and add an O and S. Nous écoutons would mean we listen. For the vous form or the y'all form, you add an EZ, and for the they form, you add an ENT. Now, if I had to tell you to write down just one thing from these whole notes, these 2 steps here would be the most important parts, but they probably don't make too much sense to you right off the bat. So let me show you some examples with this here in just a bit, and I promise it'll help out. Here's our first example. It's actually one single ER verb all charted out, and it's a verb that you've actually been using a little bit in class, you just don't realize it. It's the verb aimer, which is the verb for to like. Aimer ends in the letters ER, so that means that these rules we've been talking about apply to it. So if you want to say different things like I like, you like, he likes, we like, y'all like, they like, in English it's just a matter of adding that S on the he, she form, but in French it's a little different. Each time you want to use the verb aimer, you have to think about what subject you're using. The first thing you have to do is drop the ER off of aimer. That'll leave you with this stem, is what they call it. Then you add the appropriate ending based on the subject. So if you look back there on your notes, you'll see that the je ending is just the letter E. J'aime means I like, which you have from your notes the other class. That's something you've seen before, you just didn't understand the process that formed it. If you want to say you like, you have to take that ER verb aimer, you have to drop off the ER, and then you have to add the appropriate ending for tu. The way you say you like is by adding that ES, and it's pronounced tu aimes. Aimer all by itself with its ER means to like. So if you just say il aime, it's not going to make any sense. You're saying he too like. In order for you to say he likes in French, you have to drop the ER off of aimer and add that il ending, which is just the letter E for il aime. He likes. If you want to say we like, again, follow that same two-step process. Drop off the the ER, and then add your ONS ending for nous. Nous aimons means we like. If you want to say y'all like, two steps. First step is to drop the ER. Second step is to add the right ending. For the vous form, you add an EZ. For they, for ils and els, you drop the ER, and you add an ENT. For ils and els, M is how it's pronounced. You actually don't hear the ENT when you pronounce it. So just like avoir, the challenge that most of my students have isn't necessarily working through the two steps. When you have your notes in front of you, a lot of people can understand that part. The thing they have trouble with is actually memorizing the endings. So once again, I have a song for you. Forgive me for having to sing it on the video instead of having a way cool video. But again, it's one of those tunes where if it gets stuck in your head, then your forms get stuck in your head. Now in this case, I'm actually going to sing the letters for you, and the letters are the endings. They're actually the endings in order. So you've got the je ending here, the tu ending, and then the il ending. Later on you have the nous ending, then the vous ending, and then the ils and els ending. Now the one thing I must tell you is that I sing the letters, I sing the letters the French way. So if you forgot, the letter E in French is pronounced E. The letter S is the same, O-N is the same, and then Z is Z, and T is T. So it might throw you off a little bit. If you'd like to sing it the English way, you feel free, but I'm the French teacher, so I'm going to sing it the French way. Here's the tune. E-E-S, E-E-S, E-O-N-S, O-N-S, E-Z, 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 E-N-T, E-N-T. Now, if you want to try it on your own, we'll try it in class, or if you want to replay it and sing along, you can. But for now, I'll leave you with that tasty off-key tidbit and talk about what some of the ER verbs are that we know. You actually know a lot of ER verbs that you can use these rules with. There are a lot of them on your notes. As I mentioned earlier, écouter, the verb for to listen, see how it has an ER at the end. These rules apply to this. So now you can officially say I listen, you listen, he listens, the whole shebang. Téléphoner, the verb for to call or telephone somebody, ends in ER. You can say we call, you call, they call, that kind of thing. Travailler, remember, is not to travel, it's to work. But now again, it's got an ER at the end, so you can say he travels, they travel, we travel, all of those words. Regarder is to watch, so you can say I watch TV, you watch TV, they watch TV by just simply dropping off the ER and adding the right endings. Adorer is to love, so you can say we love, y'all love, he loves, they love, all of that. And étudier is also an ER verb. It's got an ER at the end, and it means to study. So all of these examples would work as far as changing the ending and being able to use them in a complete sentence. So let's go ahead and try some examples here together now and kind of type them out on our own. The first example I want to do is actually by talking about the nous form of regarder. If you wanted to complete this sentence, which you will have to do something similar to this on your test one day, by saying we watch TV, you would need to do the nous form of regarder, which means you have to do the two steps. The first step is drop the ER. It leaves you with this stem. The second step is to add the correct ending. Now the way you know what ending to add is you have to look at what your subject is. Since our subject is nous, if you check your notes, the nous ending is ONS. Nous regardons la télé means we watch TV or we are watching TV. Actually has two meanings in French. If we want to say they talk with friends and we want to do the ils form of parler, follow those two steps again. Drop the ER off of parler. If ils is your subject as it is here, then you want to add that ils ending, which for ER verbs is ENT. For the je form of chanter, to say I sing well, follow those two steps again. drop your ER off of chante, add that je ending, check your notes, it's the letter E, and you end up with je chante bien, which is I sing well. And finally, if you want to say that she doesn't like, notice how there's a ne pas around my verb here. Don't let it throw you off. My subject is still she, MA is still an ER verb. I can follow the 2 steps of dropping the ER, and then because my subject is she, I can add the letter E, and I come up with Elle n'aime pas la musique classique. She does not like classical music. Now remember, if at any time you don't change these, if I were to just leave MA like it looks, I would be saying she does not to like classical music, which doesn't make any sense. And then if I change it and I put the wrong ending, instead of saying she doesn't like, it would be like me saying she doesn't likes classical music, which doesn't sound quite right to your ear either. So really get used to memorizing those endings and using the right one as appropriate for the subject. Last thing we need to remind you about are those 2 magical words, since I just had it in the example, ne and pas. Remember, you can use them to make any sentence negative. So you don't just have to say we don't like or he doesn't like. You can say we don't watch TV, we don't sing well. All kinds of things can be made negative. In this case, I wanted you to change from nous aimons le français, which is like my favoriteest sentence ever because it means we love or like French class, to the negative, horrible, I never want to hear you sentence, which is we don't like French. If you wanted to say we don't like French, remember you have to take that original sentence of we like French, sorry I'm missing my accent mark off the E here, or off the C here, and you have to change it to make it negative, which means putting a ne and pas around your verb. Remember, the verb is the thing that you change the ending on to make it match the subject. It's the action part of the sentence. In this case, it's the liking. So I put my ne pas around it, which is really, really good. But if you want to be an A+ French student, you'll actually drop this E here because they don't like the 2 vowels next to each other. We've been talking about that every now and then. And make it nous n'aimons pas le français. But honestly, I never want to hear you say that sentence because it means we don't like French. Last thing we need to talk about is if you have 2 verbs in a sentence. Take a look here. When we talk about he likes to watch TV, you've got the word like, you've got the word watch TV. Remember, the word like is the verb aimer. Remember, the word for to watch TV is regarder la télé. Again, missing the accent marks. Bear with me here, though. It makes it go quicker if I don't put them in. If you have 2 verbs, you do not have to change the ending on both verbs. You only change the ending on the first one. So if I want to say he likes, I have to change the verb aimer to the form that matches il by dropping the ER, add that ending of the letter E because that's the right ending for he, and then when I use to watch TV, I get to leave it as to watch. I get to leave it as regarder because it's in its original form, and anytime you have 2 verbs, like I said a moment ago, you only have to conjugate the first one. I know this is a lot of information to digest, and I know this has been a really long video. Do your best to work with what you can. If you were catching on to avoir, you might have an okay time with this. If it wasn't going so hot, we might have a lot to talk about in class, but don't worry, this is one of those topics where we're going to talk about this a lot in class and get it clear for you. For now, thanks for making it through the whole video and trying your best, and we'll work with this a lot more next class.